Hi everyone, my name is Klaudia and I have prepared the briefing for the motion. This House believes that major award shows, including but not limited to the Oscars, Emmys and Tonys, should abandon gender and acting categories. I think this is incredibly interesting motion, which is quite up to date in a last couple of years. And I think it required a couple of technical skills. But also it have quite interesting clashes, which are not always very, very intuitive. So I would like to go through a couple of points. So I think the first one, it's about the burdenness of proof in that sort of motion. I think it's incredibly important to realize that it's extremely hard to defend these motions based only on the principles. Because even if you can explain one principle, it's very likely that the opposition side will also have the different principle, or might be the same principle but executed in a different way, which means that you are risking a lot in terms of will judge by my principle, but also it's unclear to find the comparative advantage, right? Because assuming both principles are explained equally, people have quite of an issue to decide which value is the most important one, right? So if on one side you said that I want a more equality for this group of people, or I want more representation, it's not necessarily clear which value is more important, and you can prove each value on either side of the house. So what I would recommend to people, firstly, when looking at that sort of motion, trying to find out both practical and the principle clash. Why I think the practical clash is important, because I think it's quite interesting how you are mechanizing that sort of things, right? So first of all, in that sort of cases, presumably there is off clash the question, will this awards matters? Because on both sides of the house, you will be giving the awards. And it's hard to imagine that one of the sides stand up and say, oh, this awards does not matter at all, therefore we should abandon the categories. That sounds like very hard burden, or suggesting that the debate it's a wash anyway, or that no one cares about this. So this seems like a strategy which no one would actually want to make. So I don't think that this is something which you should be bothered. But the question is how the mechanism will be effective in that sort of motion. And I think then you need to consider a couple of factors, right? So the first factor is who is selecting the winners. So if the winners are being selected by people who have certain level of biases or certain level of choice, which is already predicated on some previous patterns, it might be quite problematic to see how the women or non-binary people or the minorities which you would like to help in this motion will be benefiting. Why this is the case? Because if you look for the statistics from the previous Oscars or the other academies, you are seeing the disproportion being 80 to 20, 90 to 10. At best, I guess it's 70-30. In terms of how many percentage of men was being granted an award in the categories when there was no gender division, which kind of shows that people intuitively are going into the male creators and the male directors, even if a woman possess 50% of the society, and which kind of shows that to some extent it's very likely that even if you will remove the special gender category, you will be granting still 80% of men the awards and only 20% of women. So on one side of the house, in terms of the opposition, you can say how ineffective it will be based on the current prejudice. On the prop side, you can say, yes, this prejudice exists anyway. We can bring to the discussion more attention. We can present that to the people as a bigger issue, or we can have clear statistical evidence that this is the problem, or you can say we don't care. We just don't want this division and that being treated as the second worst category. So this is one clash, right? On one side of the house, you are saying, look, it will not be effective, and you can respond that you don't care. On the other hand, you might say, but to some extent, it's unclear if people will be voting that way, right? Like maybe there are great female performance. Maybe our society progressed. Maybe our society progressed to the extent that they're able to accept the female actresses, but maybe they are not yet able to accept the non-binary people. Then the question is, are you happy with that partial benefit? And do you think that this is enough, or that's going to the positive trajectory that it will be accepted in the future? Or maybe you just want to focus on the things which are present right now. So you also need to know this response to this question in your head, right? So when you are prepping, you should ask yourself, what would be my response to that question? What if people will still be prejudiced, or is this bringing like any value or any significant meaning for me and my case in particular? So I think then you are looking for the third question, right? In terms of what I want to achieve, worst case scenario, even if these people who I'm assuming will be winning, like women recognition and names, will not be selected. So on upside, you have guaranteed quotas, at least for the women who might be selected. On up, you can also say, hey, maybe let's just add the non-binary category. And if you already say, yeah, but people hate like a non-binary people, like people will not be watching, people will not be happy with this category. On up, you can say, yeah, but these people are not disappearing. They will still be there. So the question is, how loud, how significant will be the potential backlash which you might create. So as you can see, from both angles, you can possess some level of like narrative, some level of commentary. I think when this discussion was raised, it was either being raised by like the non-binary actors or like creators being like, I don't have category for myself. And B, also the academies were just like selecting and assigning the particular category for these people, which is not necessarily clear why this is like potentially the better solution. So my advice for how to like debate this motion will be to ask yourself a couple of questions during the prep time. A, who is selecting the winners? Because if this is not like a public vote, and if this is like a specific commission, you should know what are the informations, what are the incentives of this commission. They're probably not like the judges from like the judiciary system, which have like that liability and particular responsibility, right? In the other hand, if this is a public voting, you should ask yourself what motivates public vote. Even if I'm attracted like the particular gender, that doesn't mean that I necessarily will perceive them as the best performing actor. What are the types of roles which usually are like the most popular? Maybe people like certain voices. Maybe people associate certain roles which can be only played by one gender. Maybe that will be a problem. Maybe that shouldn't matter at all, because it's only about the recognition. It's only about your name being put a couple of times in the newspaper. Maybe it's only about getting more people being nominated. Or maybe we should nominate less people. Maybe this is like to be the spectrum. Maybe it's better to have like a one non-binary, like an actor being selected for like a 20 years than having a people competing in their own separate categories. Maybe this is like a big change or like a big message being sent. What I would say is you should try to project and reimagine what will be the reaction in the newspapers if you would introduce this change tomorrow. What will be the group of people who will be reacting positively? What will be the group of people which will be reacting negatively? What will be the group of people who will not care? Therefore, you ask yourself a question: which of these groups is the most influential one? Is the group of people which will be making problems, criticizing, and not respecting the award the most influential group within the motion? If yes, then probably you need to trade a lot of stuff. If the most important group of people, it's some actresses, some actors, like non-binary people, which deserve to get recognition, the question is, will they be satisfied with having decreased representation in order of highing up the prestige of the award? Or maybe there is a chance, similarly when it was done with like some specific type of movies, that they will be receiving this award not for their performance, not for how good actors or like actresses or like singers they are, but for like the particular quotas, or like because it will be politically correct, or because it will be like a socially accepted, or something like this. this is what I think it's another important part when considering this types of motions, and this motion in particular. In terms of like the useful reading, I think if you will just put in the Google, should Oscars like abandon like the gender categories, you will get a couple of interesting articles. Some of them will be like giving the origins, how the discussion started in like 2019, Sam Smith, and what's going on. But some will also show you 5 reasons why we should keep the Oscars gender categories, 5 reasons why we should let it go, which could be an inspiration for this motion. I don't know. But certainly it shows that there are some people who are willing to discuss this, and therefore you can get like the specific data used with the examples, which in that sort of motions are extremely helpful. Why they are helpful? Because sometimes people are consuming like a different type of pop culture or the culture. You might have people who know all of like the Shakespeare writings. You might have people who know all of like the LOL games or the other esports. And people have perfect right to do this, but also you need to consider that judges also have the different level of knowledge in terms of the pop culture, which means that you want to use and you want to explain this, you want to display this as clearly as possible. So you want to interact with the reaction, you want to know what people might know, what they might not know. And also, you want to do 2 things at the same time, which are quite challenging. On one hand, you don't want to be example dependent, and you don't want to be too specific and too fixated on one issue. In the other hand, you don't want to be too generic. You want people being able to conceptualize this. Usually, the things which are the most on top are good to be discussed. Like if there is like a release of like a Taylor Swift album, which is breaking all of the records, which is being like very much hyped by the media and even by the debaters, you are like, okay, this is something which everyone will know about. But if you will be starting discussing some very, very niche movie, which was only in like a very particular cinemas or on like some paid subscription based, it's extremely hard to prove that people will be like watching this, like people will know what you are referring to. So therefore, it's important trying to generalize that a bit, or maybe being like, oh, imagine you are reading about that in the newspaper. Imagine if this particular committee will be changed and vote that way. I think people are already doing that in terms of like some sort of like sports events, in terms of like some Eurovision, and being like, what if? So you need to ask yourself a question, what if, and trying to analyze that things. Therefore, to summarize, I would recommend going more into the practical clashes because it's better, easier path to victory. Second of all, ask yourself a question, who is picking the people, what criteria people are using, what are the ramifications and the consequences of this pick, what are the notions and like the previous patterns in the past, how people were selecting. And then also, what are the alternatives? Why the alternatives are bad? And thirdly, what's the current state of mind of the society? And you can't use black and white. You should go more like on the spectrum, trying to give some level of characterization. And I think in that case, it will be easier for people to pick it up and easier to make choices. And I would say it will be it. I hope that you enjoyed. If you have any questions, you can email me, message me on Discord, since I'm one of the judges in this competition. So feel free to ask for any help or any assistance. And yeah, best of luck with the future rounds of the league.